So hello everybody, good morning, a good afternoon or good evening, depending on where everyone is joining from. And to all of you, welcome back for day 2 of the 6th annual Asia Pacific Spectrum Management Conference. Apologies that we're a little bit late getting started, but great to be getting going. And it's great as well to see that so many of you are once again joining us for the proceedings today. We've looked at some of the figures from yesterday, and I think in total we had more than 550 of you participating via the platform yesterday. And I'm told by the team that we had another 300 or so tuned in to watch the various live streams on Twitter. So in total, more than 800 people were with us for the sessions yesterday, which is fantastic. And we really do appreciate you all joining us and your involvement in the event. And so, yeah, we had a great start yesterday, and we had some really interesting panels and various showcase sessions. And if you missed any of the proceedings from yesterday, then don't worry. The recordings from all of the sessions are available to watch again. You should have received an email earlier this morning with the links for how to access the sessions. And in addition, you can find all of the recordings from the first day, and they will be updated for all of the days for the event up on the Forum Global YouTube page. So you should be able to receive all those. There's a link to all of those in the reception area on the platform. So now on to today's sessions. So I'm just going to bring up the presentation. Thank you, Kate. So on to today's session. So we are going to be starting off very shortly with a couple of keynote presentations. So we're delighted to have Mario back. He obviously took part in the opening ceremony yesterday, and we're delighted Mario's back again today, and KJ Wee for some keynote presentations. We're then moving on to start focusing on WRC. So we have a panel that's going to be looking at WRC, the implementation of WRC-19 decisions, but also looking ahead to WRC-23. And then we're going to be looking at views from outside the region. So having some of the speakers from outside Asia talk about preparation in other regions. We then have a short speed networking session, and it's great that so many of you joined us for the networking session yesterday. So we'll have another short networking session then before we move on to look at millimeter wave. So looking at kind of the ecosystem that's emerging within the millimeter wave bands. And finally, we finish off today with the 2 showcase sessions. So once again, a really busy day, and we're looking forward to hearing all the discussions. So I don't really want to take up any more of your time, and instead I now wanted to welcome to the stage our first keynote speaker for the day, Mario Manovitz. So Mario, hello and welcome. It was great to have you here yesterday, Mario, for the opening ceremony, and we're really grateful that you've now come back today to participate in today's proceedings. So I know that shortly you're going to be introducing our speakers for the day and also moderating the panel. But first of all, I'd like you to open today's proceedings with your keynote presentation. So welcome, Mario, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Dan, and hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you today. So after the first day, we will now focus on what happened in WRC-19, but mainly looking ahead to WRC-23, which is the panel that we will have afterwards. So it's a pleasure for me to be addressing you today. I thank you, Forum Global, for the invitation. And so we can start with the presentation done. So as you know, WRC-19, which was recently held last year, was the largest WRC ever. We had over 3,400 participants, representing 163 member states and 129 other organizations, including the industry. It was held outside Geneva. It was in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, and it was highly successful. We had also a record number of proposals, nearly 2,600 proposals, which were dealt through the conference. And of course, the major outcome of the conference was the to revise the international radio regulations, which is a more than 100-year-old international treaty that governs the use of the spectrum and the satellite orbits. So if we go to the next slide, we can see the main outcomes of the conference. You are all familiar with them, but just to remind you the main aspects that it covered. So of course, additionally to the bands that were identified for IMT in previous conferences in the low and middle ranges, this conference identified in the millimeter wave band additional frequency bands for IMT, notably for IMT 2020. And then for the growing number of non-GSO satellite systems, a stable regulatory framework was defined, based on a milestone process that will enable this to be done in a more, let's say, reasonable way. Also for broadcasting satellites, new orbital slots were opened, and through Resolution 559, many developing countries now have regained access to these orbital slots that were lost over time, and the situation was degraded over time. So this is a good result for developing countries. Also, the hub systems were recognized by having assigned to them additional radio frequency bands. This is promising to connect, I hope, rural areas, isolated areas. Let's see if it's a complementary solution to the satellite solution for those areas, and we can help bridge the digital divide with this other additional tool. Then SIMs were also defined regulatory, operational, technical conditions for them. So both for the terrestrial, aeronautical, and maritime SIMs. Then the maritime distress and safety system was expanded, and the new recommendation was approved on intelligent transport systems, which is very important for the future. And then for the first time ever, a gender declaration was approved, trying to sensitize the membership, including not only member states, but also the industry and other organizations, on the need to promote more gender participation in ITUR activities. So if we go to the next slide, we can see now that having finished the work of that conference, a new cycle begins. So we have, if you see on the left upper side of the slide, the international framework that, as we said, was updated at the conference. Now we start a new cycle. So the changes that were made in the international framework, which is the radio regulations, will now be considered by the regional organizations, such as APT, for instance, in this case, and finally will be implemented by the national authorities. That they will have to take on the role of assigning the spectrum nationally, licensing the spectrum, etc. So looking ahead into the next cycle, the national interest, and then we go there into the last part of the slide, the right side, the right-hand side. The national interest will influence regional proposals and then define the changes that will be made in the radio regs in the next conference. So this is the cycle that repeats itself all the time. So international results go into regional and national frameworks. They are enforced at the national level, and then the national interests and national views are communicated regionally, harmonized regionally, and inputted to the next conference, and they become part of the international framework again. So in the next slide, we see this preparation for the next conference. So we have the 4-year cycle, where we have a preparation of any conference, and we have then the user requirements, the technological advancements that we see happening, that they are input to the studies and to the proposals for the next conference. And then we have the preparation at the national level, at the regional level, trying to harmonize national positions in a given region, and then at the global level, trying to harmonize the various regions into global positions. And then the conference will decide on those in order to update the radio regulations and to come up with the new results. In the next slide, we can see this process in a more clear way. So we can see in the upper side the WRC-19 results that gave place to the first conference preparatory meeting for the next conference, and then all the study cycle that is there in white in the middle, that all the study groups of the ITUR carry out these studies and prepare the report for the CPM2 that you see there in orange, that will produce a report that will be inputted into WRC-23. So if we go to the next slide, there is, sorry, in the previous slide with the arrow, there is where we are now in the beginning of this study cycle that we said. So all the 6 study groups of the ITUR have been distributed, all the questions to be studied, and they are carrying out the studies. And then on the right side, you can see that at the same time, at the regional level, the regional groups are carrying out the same studies, and the APT is going to do so, and they have their first meeting now in September to try to start this work at the regional level in the Asia-Pacific region. So in the next slide, we can see that because of the COVID situation that we are all aware of, all meetings of ITUR have gone virtual, as it is the case of this meeting that we are here attending. And for the first time ever, we've had virtual meeting of the Radio Regulations Board, which nobody would have expected, but also of the Radio Communication Advisory Group and of the various study groups. And this is going on very well with a little hesitation at the beginning, but now people are getting used to it, and everybody is convinced that this is the only way to move forward with the situation that we are experiencing worldwide. So if we go to the next, Dan. So this is also the case for the regional groups, and I congratulate all the regional groups for having taken that measure rather than taking delays in their preparations of the next conference. So the ASMG, which is the Arab group, had the chance to, or the good luck to be able to meet before the COVID stroke at the beginning of the year. But then we had the CTEL, CEPT, and ATU meetings that have been carried out virtually, or are being carried out virtually, like the ATU that is currently going on. And as I mentioned, the APT one is going to meet also virtually in September. So everybody has taken this measure in order to advance the work, which is very good. Next. So if we look forward to the WRC-23 that we will be discussing more in detail in the coming panel. Next. We can see the various agenda items that are there. If we start with mobile or fixed, mobile, and broadcasting, we have 3 agenda items that apply to Region 3 as a whole, or to some countries of Region 3, and we have 2 agenda items that apply only to Region 1. Agenda item 1.1 is a consequential agenda item of WRC-19 and refers to the revision of the footnote on the 4.8 to 499 gigahertz band. Under agenda item 1.2, the only band being considered on a global basis, and specifically for Region 3, will be the 7 gigahertz band. Both agenda item 1.1 and 1.2 refer to midbands for IMT that are coming back to the discussion. And then agenda item 1.4 brings to the table the discussion about hubs as IMT base stations and where there is a need to revise current footnotes and resolutions to expand its use. If we go to the next slide, then we have to maritime and aeronautical topics. We have agenda item 1.6 on suborbital vehicles. The discussion on these topics will encompass more than the technical considerations and will consider also the status of suborbital stations. And then we have agenda item 1.11 that supports the modernization of GMDSS and the implementation of e-navigation. This is very relevant to several countries of the region, of course. Then moving on to the next slide, we have the science issues, and we have agenda item 1.14 that looks for an allocation to EESS in bands above 200 gigahertz. And considering that these are very high frequency bands, I'm hoping that this will be a non-controversial agenda item at the conference. And then finally, if we move on, we have satellite matters, of course. We see the continued interest for ESIMs, both communicating with GSOs and with non-GSOs on the FCSS systems, and the potential new spectrum allocation for MSS for IoT applications. Of course, we have also agenda item 7, that is also a mini conference on itself. So next slide. As you know, CPM2, the radio communication assembly, and the WRC itself will be in 2023. The Council of the ITU already approved the agenda of the conference that was adopted by the previous conference, and we have received an expression of interest from the administration of the United Arab Emirates to host this conference in the Emirates. So we don't know yet the venue, if it's going to be in Dubai or in Abu Dhabi, and we don't know exactly the dates because it will depend on the venue, but we will know all this by the end of the year, and we will keep you posted. So most probably next conference will not be in Geneva again, but we are sure that it will be a resounding success as it was the previous one. So next slide is just to thank you for your attention, and we'll take some questions either at the end of the keynote that comes next, or at the end of the panel, depending on time. So let me just pass on the floor to the next keynote speaker and introduce him briefly. As you know, I think everybody knows in the region, Dr. KJ Wee. He is from the Republic of Korea, and he has chaired the preparatory group for WRC-19 for the region. So he's going to also present on this topic, but from a more regional perspective than I did, I presume. So KJ, I pass you on the floor and for your keynote.
Thank you, Mario. Very good presentations from your side. And before I start my presentations, I'd like to say my appreciations to the Global Forum to prepare these occasions, even the situation is very unfriendly, but I appreciate that for all efforts, the Global Forum. The second is I also appreciate Mario. You share the time with us to present what ITU is doing. And also, when I want to add one more small things that when I see the WRC agenda item, it is very well organized. So every agendas are grouped by the numbers. So it is, I guess, the first time of the WRC histories. So I appreciate that during the WRC-19, probably that's the Mario's achievement to make that. Thank you with that. Now, let me introduce my presentations. So I will present two areas. First part is who is APT, and the second part is what agenda item APT has proposed as an agenda item of the WRC-23. So number one, let's go to the next pages. Who is the APT? And most probably the participants in this forum today are very well aware of the who is APT. So I would like to skip, but it's a very simple regional organizations. So I show that map very quickly, and let's move to the next one. There are many activities under the APTs, and there are many programs, but in the fourth bullet, APT, among APT work program areas, the second bullet is a radio communications area. So let's move to the next slide. And among the radio programs, there are two major groups. One is a WRC preparatory group, which is APG, and the second one is APT wireless group, AWG. So AWG, except the WRC agenda items, all radio issues are considered in the AWG to the benefit of the members of the APT. So let's move to the next agenda, next slide. Thank you. Now, as Mario already mentioned, that we had no chance to meet, but we have a plan to meet virtually to organize the APG 23-1. So as you know, APG is organized, even its APG name is APG itself, continuing as a one of the organized group of the APT, but APT organized APG in line with the WRC cycle. So APG 23 means for the preparation of the WRC 23. And we have a plan, and we will, that is the September 24th and the 25th, 2 days, because it is a first meeting, mainly to organize and to elect the chairman and the two vice chairmen and the editorial committees and the working groups, drafting groups, etc. So I believe that the 2 days of discussion will make possible the APT to prepare the WRC 23. And normally APG working group structure in line with the CPM chapter structures, but sometimes we slightly modified to accommodate the members' need, members' demands. And then normally drafting group are structured according to the per agenda item of the WRC. So that is the main preparations I'm expecting in the September 24th and the 25th. Let's move to the next slide. Now, I would like to introduce 5 WRC agenda items because WRC-19, APG 19 has proposed 6 agenda items, but among 6, 5 agenda items were adopted by the WRC-19. So I want to highlight very briefly which agenda items APT has proposed. So let's move to the next slide. Number 1 is agenda item 1.2, so-called IMT agenda items. Of course, the other regional group also proposed similar ideas and different events, etc. And then finally, in the middle of the list of the bands, the 70-25, 71-25 is a global bands we are expecting, even it's only 100 megahertz bands, but APT proposed that bands for the global identification of the IMT. And fortunately, Working Party 5D, they met February before the COVID is pandemic, and then they organized the preparation of the their agenda item 1.2, and they agreed to develop the working documents, sharing and the compatibility studies. So, and then in the June meeting, the 5D, they didn't consider this agenda item, but in the October meeting, we are expecting they will consider the inputs and start the work in the October, which is also a virtual meeting. Next slide, please. Agenda item 1.4. During the WRC-19, there was a famous agenda item HEPS. This is called the HIPS because This is the HEPS platform for the IMT base stations. So some people has concerns whether this applications, HEPS applications, may affect the IMT systems, but that's not the intentions. That the main intention is how to facilitate IMT systems to utilize the HEPS platforms. So also Working Party 5D, during the February meeting, they started the work and they have prepared 2 ideas, working documents, to bullet point in my slide. So I believe that will continue to work and based on the input during the October meetings. Next slide, please. Agenda item 1.6, suborbital vehicles. That was part of the discussion during the WRC-19. And then in our regions, some countries believe that we need to consider this agenda item to make possible. So APG-19 has adopted and has proposed to the WRC-19. Now it is agenda item WRC-23. And then Working Party 5B, I believe a couple of weeks ago, they prepared the work and they prepared some, developed a reagent statement to the relevant group. And also Working Party 5B has received a proposal working document, but due to the limit of time, they haven't considered in detail this one, but I believe that they will continue the work in the next Working Party 5B. Next slide, please. The other agenda item is agenda item 1.7. People call it space VHF. So it is the VHF band, but space satellite usage to support AMSRS. So during this, during the last 5 Working Party 5B, they received a contribution from one of the Asia Pacific countries, and what is the concept of this space VHF, and but the same reason that due to the limit of time, those are not well considered, but I believe that information is a good start point for or to introduce how it would work. So I believe the next 5B will consider and they will develop the proper materials. Thank you. And the next slide, please. Next one is agenda item 1.11, modernization of the GMDSS. And also Working Party 5B start work. And actually this agenda item consists of the 3 ideas. So reserve 1 and the reserve 2 is something different, and reserve 3 is the concerns of the Asia Pacific countries, and which is additional satellite systems into the GMDSS. And I believe that will be the work plan will be developed by the Working Party 4C, but the work will be done by the Working Party 5B together with the 4C. So that is the current situations. And please go to the next one. Thank you. So the only 5, I introduced the 5 agenda items, but as I said earlier, we are not organized yet. So that will be after we once organized, we will present something more. So thank you very much. That's my end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, KJ. So, in view of the time, I'm told that we better pass directly to the panel discussion, and we'll take questions after the panel, where you can come back and answer some of them if they are addressed to you. Okay.
Thank you.
Without further ado, let's go now to the next part of this session, which is a panel session. So this panel session is divided into two parts. The first part is regarding the views of the industry on the implementation of WRC-19 decisions and looking ahead to WRC-23. And then we will have views from member states from outside the region. And for that, we have invited similar people to KJ, but from other regions that you will see afterwards. So let's start with the industry views. And for that, I have the pleasure to invite 4 panelists. So we have Luciana Camargos, who is the Senior Director of Future Spectrum from GSMA. Hi, Luciana, welcome to the panel. She will be representing then the mobile operators, of course. Then we have Mr. Zhu Weizong, who is the Chief Strategy Officer of a wireless product line of Huawei. So welcome, Mr. Zhu. So he will be representing the vendors, the manufacturers of equipment. Then we have Mr. Ter Brisib, who is the Global Spectrum and Regulatory Policy Manager of the Global Satellite Coalition. Welcome, Ter. He is representing the satellite community. And last but not least, we have Mr. Walid Sami, who is the Senior Project Manager of EBU, representing the broadcasting community. Welcome.
Thank you.
So welcome, 4 of you. It's a pleasure having you on this panel. And then we see that we will have the views of the mobile industry, the satellite industry, the broadcasters, and the manufacturers in this discussion. So I would like to start the panel by giving you all 10 minutes or so for introductory remarks, where you can use slides if you want. To state your views or the views of the industry sector you are representing on the implementation of the decisions of the last conference and looking ahead to the next conference. So let's go on the order of the agenda, and we'll start with Luciana. So please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mario, and thank you to Forum Global for the invitation, and it's a pleasure being here today. A bit early where I am, so I apologize for the voice. I'm here, my name is Luciana Camargos. I'm here representing the GSMA, and for us, what I do revolves around WRCs. WRC-19 was my 6th conference, and when you've been to a few conferences, you see that the discussions are always the same, although they come back in different shapes, and that's a good experience to have. But next slide, please. Before I go into WRC, I just wanted to say that GSMA had a big presence during WRC-19, and we did have a number of events. This slide shows some of our participation. We had social functions, we had seminars for delegates for the 6 regions. We had a stand. We served over 9,000 cups of coffee during WRC-19 to keep everyone going. Also 50 kilos of chocolates. So that was our small way of helping people to cope with 4 weeks of intense work. We hope that we have done a very small part of it, although I have to say WRC-19 and its location was probably without any rival. It was so beautiful, and we're all very happy to be there. So thank you very much to Egypt and to the ITU for that. But next slide, please. For WRC-19, our main agenda item was 113, and we had amazing results. We're really happy with how the conference came out. It was a lot of hard work, a lot of intense discussions until the very last moment, and I'm sure Mario hasn't recovered from that yet. But we did get global identifications in 26, 40, and 66 gigahertz for IMT. which is what we're asking for, plus some country footnotes for 50 gigahertz, although the number of countries, especially in 47.2 to 48.2, 105 countries, from my count, might be a bit wrong. It is unprecedented. Apart from that, and in next slide, we'll see that we also had other agenda items, other issues that related to us, that we were worried about, that we're interested in. There are a number of countries whose identification to IMT grew in existing footnotes in 600 and 3334, 48499, which is now a new agenda item. We also had in the 1400 megahertz, all that the issue 912 with BSS, again, issue 911 in S-band, and 28 gigahertz with Earth stations in motions, bands where IMT has an identification or has used for backhaul, for example, that were threatened by the conference, and we're very happy with how it came out. It was very good to work with various industries to come to a good result. But before I move on, I just wanted to say that Mario mentioned the declaration for women, the gender declaration at WRC-19. It was something that I worked very closely with, and I'm very happy, very, very, very happy with the results, and looking forward to working with the BR in the upcoming years on this topic. Next slide, please. Moving on to WRC-23, we have in this WRC different way. Until WRC-19, we had one agenda item that we focused on, that we paid attention. Now we have several, because for some reason, IMT identification and mobile allocation was split in many agenda items in this conference. So we are paying attention to various groups. We had 5D earlier in July, then we had 5A, B, and C later in July, and it was intense in terms of how many parallel meetings of primary agenda items for us we had. So we see that as a very tough cycle, but a cycle that the mobile industry is looking forward to working on it. So I just want to touch a bit about the fact that we are discussing low-band spectrum again in WRC-23, the 600 megahertz in Region 1. Then we have mid-band spectrum 3338, 48499, and the 6 gigahertz. And then we have 10 to 10.5. So it's a wide range of spectrum to complement the needs of 5G, and we think WRC-23 will be key to deliver that. Next one, please. This is just to show a bit of the discrepancies on the agenda items. In different regions, we're talking about different bands, which makes our discussions a bit more complicated, but also it means that we have to talk about all these bands. The mobile industry is very interested. But in the next slide, you see that we did a research with our members, and 90% of our mobile operators and 100% of equipment manufacturers who responded to our questionnaire said that 6 gigahertz, they see as high priority for use for IMT. This figure is for all three regions because they see that that's where it goes next. 3.3 to 3.8, we're catching up with what we didn't do at WRC-15 or 7, however back you want to go. But 6 gigahertz seems to see where the industry goes in the future. So to us, that was very relevant. Next one, please. If you look into the C-band, for example, the lower part, the downlink of the C-band, 3.3 to 3.8, we see that there is a difference, a discrepancy between what WRC-07 and 15 did in the identification and the decisions that country made. So lots of countries identified 200 or maybe 100 megahertz or 300 in the WRCs, but decided to use more than that. And that graph needs to be updated. And I apologize, do bear with me with that because we're working on that at the moment. But the fact that 5G came and 5G decided that 3.3 to 3.8 is the base of 5G, it means that identifications done at 2015 based on 4G, based on LTE are not enough. 200 megahertz is not enough to comply with 80 to 100 megahertz per operator, which is what the technology is optimum at. So this is why we see the 3.3 to 3.8 back in play at this conference. In the next slide, you see we did a study about cost efficiency and the impact of channel size in a network. If you reduce the channel size from 100 megahertz per operator to 60 megahertz per operator, you have to increase the network cost in 64% because you have to increase the cell sites in 64%. So that means it will be more expensive to deliver that service, which will eventually be passed to the consumer. So in that sense, we see that it is really important for us to make available more contiguous spectrum in the C-band. And in that case, we think it's important to go through the WRC channels to be able to reflect that identification and the countries be able to operate. The bands are allocated to mobile service in regions 2 and 3, and region 1 is going to be dealing with that. But we see that this study shows us it's important to do that. Next slide, please. I also mentioned that I wanted to cover a bit about the medium priority agenda items to us, which are agenda items that are not directly for IMT or for mobile service for our use, but they affect us somehow. Either they are agenda items that will be on IMT bands, or agenda items that will affect backhaul bands extensively used by backhaul, or in the last case, adjacent to a band that is identified for IMT. So we have a number of agenda items that are of medium priority that we will be monitoring, will be engaging, and if necessary, we'll be taking more of an active role in it. But they are, it's not just the 5 agenda items that we have that are of high priority. We also have these other agenda items that interest us very much. Next slide, please. So we see that WRC-23 brings solutions to these challenges, the challenges of harmonization, cost efficiency, and coverage. And we'll only be able to address that with successful outcomes at WRC-23. I've been in a few panels recently where they ask me, so does the GSMA support identification of band X to IMT? Well, it's a bit early in the process for us to say that. We can say now that we support these studies, that we're very interested in a band, and most likely we will support the identification of that band for IMT. But these studies are starting. If you look in the next cycle, next slide, and I don't want to dwell into too much because I'm sure both Mario and KJ have covered, but we are in the beginning of the cycle. We've just had the first round of meetings, which ended last Friday. And we are supposed to be providing characteristics and spectrum needs and propagation models until mid-21, when the studies will start. So to say that sharing is feasible or sharing is not feasible at this stage, that we support no change or we support something else, seems a bit premature for us and for anyone else to say. We got to go through the process. We got to do all these studies to be able to come to WRC-23 with arguments and facts. And with that, I conclude my presentation. I hope I've been fine on my time. And thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Luciana. Very clear presentation and very nice slides, of course, as usual. So let me go on to the next panelist, Mr. Zhu. Can you go on with your introductory presentation, please?
Thank you, Mario. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to present some thought from Huawei. So next slide, please. First of all, I'm to thank IUR and WRC. Actually, last year is my first time IC in Egypt, but in past 4 years, IUR and WRC are very useful.
Sorry to interrupt. There seems sorry, there seems to be some issues with the sound. Tell you what, sorry about that, everybody. What we'll try and do is we will try and sort out the issues that we had with the audio there. So apologies for that. I'm just going to bring Mario back up, and I think we'll move on to our next speaker, and then we can come back to Mr. Zhu afterwards. So Mario, if I could maybe ask you to move on and introduce our next speaker, and we'll try and sort those issues that we have with the audio and get Mr. Zhu back in a second.
Sure, no problem. So the order is not that important. So we'll go on with Ter, that will talk to us about the views of the satellite community. So Ter, are you ready for your introductory remarks? There, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mario. Good afternoon, everybody. And if you have the presentation up, if you can go to the next slide, please. So on behalf of the satellite industry, which is represented here through the Global Satellite Coalition, that brings together 7 different industry associations that establish the satellite ecosystem. Let me begin by sharing with you these 2 quotes from the leadership of the ITU, encapsulating the importance of the WRC-19 and the decisions that emerged from that milestone conference. The first from no one less than the Secretary General, Mr. Hu Lintao, and the second from the Director of the ITU Radio Communications Bureau, who's also chairing this session, Mr. Mario Maniavich. In that respect, there is no doubt the satellite industry believes that the decisions that we're taking at the conference allow satellite services to continue bridging digital, education, health, and social divides, in addition to connecting more and more citizens around the world. In fact, the various decisions of WRC-19 demonstrate that countries around the world recognize the important role that satellite communications plays in the development and growth of their economies and the provision of critical services to their citizens. So if we go to the next slide, we see that some of those decisions which were taken at WRC-19 include that concerning Earth stations in motion in the Ka band, encompassing the 28 gigahertz frequencies in the uplink and the 18 gigahertz band in the downlink, into which billions of dollars of investment from the industry has flowed over the last decade. In addition to which, of crucial importance to millions of satellite users was the decision to protect C-band downlinks, not only in Africa, but also in Asia, using the 3.6 to 4.2 gigahertz range. And administrations in these regions, including in the Asia-Pacific region, can now be assured that their vital C-band services will remain protected for years to come. In addition to these decisions, the conference, WRC-19, also made ample spectrum available for international mobile telecommunications, or IMT, whilst at the same time acknowledging the need to protect incumbent services. And for this, several millimeter wave frequency bands were identified for IMT, including some with satellite allocations, such as in the 26 gigahertz and 40 gigahertz bands. With respect to the implementation of these decisions that we're taking at WRC-19, on the next slide, we see today that steps are being taken to implement those decisions, for instance, by some administrations in the Asia-Pacific region that have thus far announced their allocation of spectrum in the millimeter wave band for mobile broadband. We also see, and the satellite industry is active, in work that is currently ongoing to implement these WRC-19 decisions, such as with respect to the methodology to secure implementation of the new regulations detailed in the resolutions adopted at the conference, and which are now, for instance, being considered by the ITU's Working Party 4A, and for which a correspondence group has already been established. Furthermore, there is also a need to develop recommendations that will enable transmitting fixed satellite service earth stations to be able to broadcast and coexist with IMT in the assigned millimeter wave bands, which is also now being considered under the auspices of the ITU's Working Party 5D. Looking ahead in the cyclical nature of the work that the ITU does through these World Radio Conferences, in the next slide, we see that the agenda for the forthcoming conference in 2023 includes a variety of items that are clearly of interest to satellite, some of which will impact existing satellite system allocations, such as Agenda Item 1.2, that will consider the identification of spectrum in the 3, 6, 7, and 10 gigahertz bands, including, as was indicated by previous presentations at this session, in the 7 gigahertz band on a global basis, and which would also include possible additional allocations to the mobile service on a primary basis. Other items which are on the agenda for WRC-23 will aim to expand existing satellite system allocations, such as Agenda Item 1.15, which will be looking at geostationary orbit fixed satellite service earth stations installed on aircraft and vessels, operating in the Ka band frequencies, 12.75 to, I beg your pardon, Ku band frequencies of 12.75 to 13.25 gigahertz, and Agenda Item 1.16 with respect to non-geostationary operating eSIMs in the Ka band, in addition to other agenda items that will consider new spectrum for satellites, such as Agenda Item 1.17, that will address new inter-satellite service allocations for inter-satellite links. Given this very broad range of items, clearly, as we will see in the next slide, there are numerous prospects for satellite services to be considered at WRC-23. We believe the continued innovation of the satellite industry has clearly been recognized with the much welcomed agenda item concerning eSIMs communicating with geostationary satellite networks in the Ku band and non-geostationary satellite systems in the Ka band. This is added to the prospects of making additional spectrum available to accommodate what is obviously the growing demand for both fixed and mobile satellite services that will enable broadband as well as 5G applications. In addition to studies on a number of issues that will include technical considerations related to the inter-satellite links to which I referred earlier in Agenda Item 1.17. This is important and is crucial not only for global non-geostationary systems, but will also support hybrid non-geostationary and GSO networks combined. So in conclusion, the decisions taken at WRC-19 and the WRC-23 agenda clearly reveals that administrations, in our view, are convinced the future belongs to all technologies operating in concert to deliver on global connectivity challenges. In hindsight, the satellite industry emerged from WRC-19, mindful of the crucial, very important role of the ITU in organizing the work, which to ensure, once again, that users throughout the world continue to benefit from a plethora of satellite services. Consequently, in this ITU study cycle leading up to WRC-23, the satellite industry looks forward to working together with governments, other industries, as well as the ITU itself, to ensure a global perspective on connectivity that also addresses national as well as regional requirements. That brings me to the end of the presentation on the next slide, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks very much, Ter. Very clear presentation, and the message is well received. I'm also convinced that the satellite services are an integral part of the ecosystem, and that there is no solution for the future that doesn't involve many technologies, and the satellite technology is one of the key ones. So, of course, you will continue to be at the core of the activities of the ITUR and the VR in particular. So let's go on, and to give more time to Zoo to solve his technical issues, we continue with Walid. So Walid, welcome with your introductory presentations. Sorry. So after a very quiet WRC-19, the broadcasting community is back to the fight, I guess. Let us hear from you.
Very much, Mario. Hello, everyone. I will present the broadcasters' issues from WRC-19 to WRC-23. The EBU, for those who may not know well the EBU, can you please go to the next slide, please? So we have 115 members in 56 countries. Our members also expand beyond Europe. We have in Middle East. We have associate members in Asia, in Australia, Japan, Iran. We broadcast in 158 languages to an audience of more than 1 billion people. Next slide, please. So as summary of the WRC-19 decisions relevant for broadcasters, the main outcome was related to the agenda item number 10, which is the agenda of WRC-23. And the most important subject was the UHF ban. I will talk about it in 1 minute. The C band and the KU band. The C band, I think previous speakers talked about the outcome of WRC-19 for the C band. And the KU band, I will talk about it very, very briefly. We had some other items also in WRC-19, the footnotes, the unauthorized uplink transmissions, and the additional spectrum allocations to INT above 6 gigahertz when it affects some of the bands used for contribution, for example, or for direct to home satellite or broadcasting. Can you please go to the next slide? Next slide, please. Yes, thank you. So regarding the the previous one, thank you. So regarding the agenda item 10, the WRC-23 agenda, UHF is on the agenda, but only for region 1, and this was foreseen since WRC-15 through the resolution 235. And this resolution was done with a very balanced text that leaves all the options possible at WRC-23. And it is foreseen to be based on a review of spectrum use and needs. In WRC-19, there were proposals to change this resolution, mainly from multi-Arab countries, but this resolution was rejected. And to just have an idea of the starting positions on the UHF band, quite large parts of Region 1, like the RCC countries and the African countries, showed support in favor of broadcasting in UHF. Also, some Arab countries supported keeping this band for broadcasting. And the CVT countries also kept a stable position in favor of keeping the resolution as it is. Next slide, please. I will go to the just one word about the outcome of WRC-19 on agenda item 1.13. As was mentioned by Luciana, there was quite a wide spectrum amount of spectrum allocated in WRC-19 to mobile with identification for IMT, but for bands above 24 gigahertz. And as far as broadcasting is concerned, only the band around 40 gigahertz was affected by the co-primary allocation to mobile and identification for IMT. Next, please. I can go now to the WRC-23 agenda items. So as I mentioned, the main subject still is the future use of the band 470-694 in Region 1. The other agenda items of importance also for us, I mentioned agenda item 1.2. This relates to the C-band in some regions. So we have 3.6, 3.8 gigahertz in Region 2, some other bands in different regions. Some also are global. But the main importance for us is well, some of bands when they affect the broadcaster's use. Agenda item 1.3 is again related to the band 3.6, 3.8 gigahertz, but in Region 1 only. And we have agenda item 1.4. These are the HAPS or HIBs in bands below 2.67 gigahertz. And we have the topic 9.1c, which is IMT, but used for fixed wireless access systems in bands for fixed service. These are the main agenda items of interest. There are some other items that you see in green, which are for low priority. I will not go into details. Next one, please. So if I just focus on agenda items 1.2, 1.3, the band of concern is the band 3.6, 3.8, and this is part of the C-band used by broadcasters for international contributions and distribution in some areas, and for fixed video links. And the European broadcasters and the subsidiary of EBU, which is Eurovision, they make extensive use of downlinks in 3.6, 4.2 gigahertz for coverage in Asia, Africa, and America. The two bands, they concern, the two agenda items concern the band 3.6, 3.8, but one of them is limited to Region 2, and the other one is for Region 1. Next one, please. So agenda item 1.4 is the use of HAPS or HIBs. We are concerned with some of the bands identified for study for these applications. The main one is the 694 960 megahertz identified for study because this is immediately adjacent to the sub 700 megahertz band, and there is a need for sharing studies between these high altitude base stations and broadcasting. There are other bands as well that could affect broadcasters' use, but mainly used for contribution, like video production, program making, and special events applications. And we will follow the studies on these, which are done in Working Party 5D. Next one, please. The topic 91C, IMT in the fixed wireless access. We know that this will not give regulatory outcome at WRC, because it is it relates to studies to be done in this cycle. But we are concerned with the possible impact of some very important bands used in fact for broadcasting purposes. The main one is, of course, the KU band, which is used for direct to home broadcasting reception or satellite reception, and it is one of the fixed service bands which will be subject of these studies. And there are other subjects as well that could be affected, other bands, that could be affected. Next one, please. So I come to the last but most important subject in WRC-23, which is for Region 1, the UHF ban. And this agenda item includes, let's say, three main topics in the resolution. The first one is to review the spectrum use and the spectrum needs for broadcasting in the whole band 470-960. Then to carry out sharing studies in the band 470-694 MHz in Region 1 between broadcasting and mobile, and also between mobile and other services in this band. This agenda item is clearly the most important one. It might affect countries in Region 3. I can mention, for example, Islamic Republic of Iran, which is party of the Geneva 06. The Geneva 06 agreement that could also be affected by any changes in this band, but also other parts of Region 3 which are in border with countries from Region 1. I think that's all as introductory remarks. You will find in the presentation also additional slides with some details, but I will not bring them now on. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Walid. Well, the broadcasters are one of the big communities of the radio communications family. So we are glad to have you in the panel and to share your concerns and your views on the future with all of us. Thank you very much. So I'll have you back then for the questions and answer. And I'm told that Zoo is back with us, which is good news. Welcome back, Zoo. And
hello,
if you can restart your presentation, because it was not really very, we couldn't hear you well. So yeah, please start from.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I will very briefly to introduce my presentation. First of all, I need to take this chance to thank ITUR and WRC, as I mentioned, because without ITUR and WRC, global harmonized spectrum, I think for the mobile industry cannot develop so quickly. Let's take 5G as an example. Start from, please, next page, please. Start from 2003. After 70 years, this year, 5G is deployed in many countries. Let's see, by the end of first half of this year, among 40 countries have released the 5G spectrum. Among this, 90% of the new 5G spectrum is in the mid-band. As Mario mentioned, right now it's the starting port for the new cycle. So let's see, what's the new band spectrum for the future. Next slide, please. First, let's take the 5G role in the global industry. From GSMA report, it seems 5G will contribute 2.2 trillion between 2024 to 2034. So it's a huge, how to say, amount of, yeah. So the 5G will be the engine for the next social digital transformation. And 5G is speed up this year. By the end of last year, there are more than 200,000 5G base stations. But we think by the end of this year, this number will reach 1 million. Most is in Asia Pacific. And the 5G user is also will reach 200 and more than 200 million by the end of this year. Next page, please. So particularly for the APEC, play a very important role in the global economic. APEC have more than 67 population, and the GDP is more than 40. But for the 4G, you can see the global average 4G penetration is 52, but in APEC is almost 60, and the DOU is also in the high than other region. It reach like 10 gigabytes, and in the 5G racing, I think Asia Pacific is in the leading position. South Korea is the first 5G commercial country, and the China is the largest 5G commercial country. More than 80% of the global 5G base station is in Asia, and more than 70% of the global 5G subscriber is in Asia. So I think APEC will play a more and more important role in the future. Next page, please. And because of the coronavirus, a lot of user behavior is shift from offline to online, like what we are have today's meeting, online meeting. A lot of online things is happen in the locking down area. And in the locking down area, let's take some figure from the new network in China. The traffic is increased more than 100 times, 100 to 1.5 times in the locking down time. And after the break, the traffic is still remain to like 30 to 40 increase. So the pandemic change a lot of user behavior, and this behavior will continue in the following years. Next page, please. And looking forward to the future, let's see what will happen. In the consumer area, I think the mobile video area is coming. The ultra high dimension video, AR, VR service will booming in the near future because of the 5G deployment. So in the 3G area, the DOU is around like several hundred megabytes, and in the 4G area is several gigabytes. But how about in the 5G? I think the 5G will reach 100 or 200 gigabytes in the near future. But someone will maybe will doubt why, what kind of application will generate a so huge amount of DOU. Let's do some calculation. Here we do some calculation, use the 4K. For instance, if you watch 4K video 1 hour per day, the DOU will reach 250 gigabytes. If you watch 8K 3D VR, 7 minutes is enough 1 month to reach more than 250 gigabytes. So the consumer business will drive the MBB network deployment. they will need more spectrum in the near future. Maybe in 2025, maybe in 2030. And in the other side, in the vertical side, there are also a lot of like smart factory, smart transportation, smart grid will need more spectrum in the future. Next slide, please. So here is the whole picture of the spectrum for the MT. Right now, for the sub-3G and also the C-band is already allocated for the MT. But how about the future? Here I mentioned two things. One is 6 gigahertz and millimeter wave. For sure, millimeter wave will play a very important role in the future for the fixed wireless access and also for the hotspot. But how about the citywide coverage and the capacity layer? We think 6 gigahertz will play a very important role in the future. As Luciana mentioned in the survey with the operator and the industry, 90% of the surveys support the 6 gig is the high priority for the next cycle. Next page, please. So in the next 4 years, I think the whole industry need working together. First, to study the coexisting and sharing study in the coming years and the next year. And in the same times, for us, like Huawei, for the vendors, we need to develop some new coding or new model, new algorithm to do some innovation to provide some new model and parameter to the sharing, to the coexistence in the future. And all in the same time, we also need working together to build it, to incubate the 6 gigahertz ecosystem. So let's working on this direction. I hope 4 years later, 6 gigahertz will be the next wave primary band for the 5G beyond or the 6th generation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zhu. So this very clear presentation as well from another perspective, the mobile industry views. So let's let's bring all the panelists back on stage. Thank you. And we'll start the question and answer session. So let me start by addressing some questions that we have already received from the audience. So they were more active than usual, and they started already asking some questions. So let me start with a question that is more for all or for several of you. So the question reads as follows. The 3.5 gigahertz band is very important for 5G implementation, but based on the agenda of WRC-23, currently many operators around the world also already started implementation. Do you have a recommendation for this, especially for developing countries or for many countries with challenging about satellite services? So, well, trying to understand this better because it was written in a rush, I guess. It's about the 3.5 gigahertz band. The issue is it's very important now for developing countries, but it will only be discussed in WRC-23. So what do you think about the use of this band in the meantime? So that's how I understand it. So maybe you can start with you, Luciana.
Sure, Mario. Thank you very much. Yes, the 3.5 gigahertz band is very important to us. Is where 5G is growing everywhere. We do see that there is the agenda item for 3334 and 3638 do not cover region 3. We do, however, see as well that the band 3.4 to 4.2 is allocated to the mobile service on a primary basis to region 3. So countries in region 3 can use that band for IMT according to the radio regulations. It is. We've did a report last year about the use of this band in Region 3 in APAC countries. It's in our website. If anyone would like to see, I can share that report or go to our website and look for it. It talks about the availability of 33238 in Region 3 and the steps necessary to release that to IMT in countries and what is needed in terms of studies, in terms of coexistence and solution for coexistence. So yes, for us, that band is key. And we believe that although it's not part of Region 3 for WRC-23, Region 3 can already do that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ter, would you have views on that as well?
Yep, certainly, Mario. Thank you very much for the question. In the Asia-Pacific region, we are of the view that there is no substitute for C-band satellite services in Asia. Quite clearly, spectrum in the 3.6 to 3.8 gigahertz, and even up to 4.2 gigahertz downlink band, and since we're discussing the C-band issues, the 6.425 to 7.075 gigahertz uplink band continue to be critical to support the customers of satellites and their business activities. Some of them are fundamental, these services, to continuity, access of information, encompassing broadcasting of TV programs or data services, e-government, telemedicine, teleeducation, disaster recovery, and emergency response. And so, without a doubt, these services are crucial. Their dependence on the C-band is absolutely necessary. For instance, with respect to mobile backhaul, these C-band frequencies offer reliable backhaul connectivity solutions for mobile networks in remote areas. They provide capacity for large regions. In the Pacific Islands, for instance, in French Polynesia, in Tonga, in Papua New Guinea, C-band connectivity is at the core of the inter-island communication service. And so our view remains that, in fact, we do not have a substitute for C-band services in the Asia-Pacific region, and that access to this spectrum really needs to be preserved and maintained.
Thank you, Ter. Yes, well, I agree that the core of the discussion on this band is exactly this point. In some regions, this band is not necessarily used anymore, and it can be then given to the mobile industry or identified for IMT. In other regions, and mainly for tropical areas, this is a key band for satellite services, not only in Asia, but also in Africa and other regions. So this will be at the core of the discussions again in WRC-23. So let me address these other questions to Zhu. Zhu, this question reads as follows. Shouldn't the mobile industry prove the viability of millimeter wave spectrum before seeking more?
Yeah, so for the millimeter wave, I think, as I mentioned, millimeter wave will play a very key role in the 5G. But because of the cost and also the coverage, my opinion on that is millimeter will play a key role in the some scenario, like the hotspot, and also like some fixed wireless access scenario. Yeah, because in some countries, some region, the fiber to home is very expensive and long ROI. So how to utilize the 5G, utilize the millimeter wave is very key, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the question is more than if you haven't yet used the millimeter wave band, why are you asking for more? This is a bit the sense of the question.
Oh. Okay. So yeah, as I mentioned, millimeter wave is more focused on the hotspot and the FWA. But as I mentioned, for long term in the future, for the citywide coverage, there are a huge demand for the speed and for the bandwidth. So we need some citywide spectrum to provide the coverage in same time provide the citywide capacity. So that's the reason, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Well, this controversy will continue. of people questioning why more spectrum, if not all the identified one is yet in use. So it's we will be seeing it coming again and again. I have a question for you, Walid. Believe it or not, from Region 3. So the question is, do you see the future spectrum needs for broadcasting similar as today's? Or is there a convergence between technologies, for instance, IMT and broadcasting, that will decrease the total amount of spectrum needed for broadcasting?
Okay, thank you. That's a very, very good question. Thank you very much. First of all, the broadcasting service proved to be crucial in times like the COVID-19 pandemic. All the indicators showed an increase in the audience for broadcasting during the lockdown in almost all countries. And this provided a very, very useful service in remote education, information, especially the let's say faithful information compared to whatever can circulate over social networks. And this is agnostic to the traffic. And this is the beauty of the broadcasting, is that it reaches everyone independent of the traffic. Now, will this continue in terms of spectrum needs or requirements? I can mention reasons for which I think yes. The answer is yes. You know, the move from standard definition to high definition television, and now the ultra high definition television, this requires more spectrum. And we know that in Asia, they are quite advanced in using digital terrestrial television to broadcast also in ultra high definition television. In Japan, for example, they go to 8K. Anyway, there are also other reasons, like the introduction of future technologies that need spectrum as well. When you have a transition between old technology and new technology, you need spectrum to be able to do it. And about convergence, there are developments, and we are involved in for convergence. And I can mention the 5G broadcast technology, which is part of the, let's say, the 5G or the 5G family. But this technology is dedicated for broadcasting purpose, and it needs spectrum. So it is not, it cannot use the same spectrum as for the usual IMT applications. And there is an ITU survey going on for Region 1 for the administrations to define their requirements in view of the agenda item 1.5 of WRC-23. For PMSC, just to finish, sorry, for PMSC, there is even increased need for spectrum, especially after the allocation of the 700 and 800 megahertz band for wireless. So this prevented wireless microphones from continue to use the UHF band fully. So there is more pressure, and they need to go also have alternative bands. And convergence with regard to PMSC is quite important, because 5G with its low latency could be a very good candidate for PMSC, and we have projects in EBU to study exactly the applicability of 5G for PMSC. So all this represents opportunities, but it needs time for us to see what is feasible and what is not. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Walid. I think it's a very let's say educating answer to all of us on the future of broadcasting. So Luciana, I have a couple of questions that I will merge in one, that is regarding your mention of this additional cost of 64% if we decrease from 100 megahertz to 60 megahertz, that you said that there is an increase in cost of deployment of 64%. So the question is, if it is applied to all mid and mid-band and millimeter wave band, or just to a specific band. And the other question is, if this is true, then why have operators not paid substantially more per megahertz for the slots of chunks or of 100 megahertz and more than for smaller ones?
Well, those are two very different questions. So starting from the first, so the study was conducted, and again, it's in our website, so please do come and have a look at that in the Spectrum part of the GSMA website. The study was conducted last October, and it was for the C-band specifically. So it was for 3.3 to 3.8, and it was an analysis of the impact if you release 100 megahertz, 200 megahertz, 500 megahertz, 800 megahertz. So how would the networks behave if you have more spectrum as opposed to less spectrum? Of course, you can do a network with less spectrum, and operators have been doing that for a long time. But what the study shows is that if you go from 100 megahertz channel to 60 megahertz channel, you have to increase your cell sites by 64%. So that might not translate exactly in 64% cost. That has an analysis need to be done on that. But on number of sites, to be able to have the same throughput, you need 64% more sites. So that is the analysis that is done. The way pricing works for mobile networks is very different, so it's difficult to compare how they would pay on one situation and how they would pay on another situation. But depending on the cost that you have to implement your network, you would have a direct relationship to how much your service was going to cost. And that is what we're trying to discuss.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
I cannot do the same analysis for other bands, because then we need to understand what bandwidth is available in other bands, what sort of technology is available in other bands. If you go to millimeter waves, it's very different. If you go to lower bands, it's also very different. So this study was conducted specifically for one technology in one band, and we need to be very clear that it cannot be translated as easily.
Okay, thank you. So I have a couple more questions, and then we will show the results of the poll that Forum Global carried out on what are the more prominent topics for WRC-23. So the first one is to Zhu. So it says several countries in Asia Pacific have already assigned the 3.5 gigahertz millimeter spectrum for 5G usage. However, several regulators have not yet allowed 5G on existing mid-bands, 2.3 gigahertz, and legacy FDD bands. What is your recommendation to regulators to allow 5G on these bands? Is there any reason not to allow 5G on these bands?
Thank you. Our opinion for the 5G area, the target network should be all bands to 5G. But 4G and 5G will coexist in a long term. So the point is for the spectrum, for the band should be technology neutral. So no matter for the sub 1G, sub 2G, 2.3, 2.6 should be 5G ready. So that's the suggestion to the regulator to remove the technology neutral. Yeah, should be the technology neutral. If you still have some based on technology, I think it's how to say very bad thing to the mobile operator to deploy a very high capacity and high experience network. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I have one more for Ter and one for Walid, and then we'll go for the poll. So Ter, with the 5G set to be delivered through a mix of technology and a network of networks, to what extent will the decisions at WRC-19 help meet the future requirements of key technologies such as satellite, including eSIMs, of course, and alongside those of the mobile ones?
Thank you very much, Mario. And one of the key outcomes of WRC-19 was the international consensus to preserve the 28 gigahertz Ka band for satellite broadband services on the one hand, and to accommodate 5G technology in other globally harmonized bands. These globally harmonized bands specifically identified for 5G from the conference out of the 33 gigahertz worth of spectrum that was studied totals some 17.25 gigahertz in all, encompassing spectrum in the 26 gigahertz range, in 37 to 43.5, 45.5 to 47, 47.2 to 48.2, and the 66 to 71 gigahertz ranges. In my view, these spectrum allocations contribute significantly and enable the ability to meet the future requirements of these key technologies.
Mm-hmm. Thanks very much. Then for Walid, this is a question of my own, if you allow. We all know that agenda item 1.5 on UHF is relevant to region 1. So how would this agenda item affect region 3 countries, if any?
Yes, thank you, Mario. Yes, I mentioned earlier the case of one country, region 3, which is the Islamic Republic of Iran, but this is not the only case. There's a long border between region 1 and region 3, and this will definitely affect or any change in the band. These countries, the border countries with region 3, will certainly affect the coordination with region 3. But beyond this geographical, let's say, interaction, of course, any change in the allocation in region 1 will have definitely an impact on the, let's say, the use of the band globally. It cannot go simply in one region. Region 1 is a big region with 120 countries or around. And if there is a change, this will definitely then propagate into other regions. So it's important. I can mention that in region 3 countries, well, DTT is quite successful in many countries. It is introduced. I mentioned in Japan, in Korea as well. And in China, DTT is well established, and it is used effectively, well received by a significant percentage of the population, and this will definitely be affected by any change in the in region 1. So this is how I see the possible interaction.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the answer is what you said, that the border between region 1 and region 3 is very long and important. So this is the impact that we'll have. Also, region 2 is maybe less involved in this, but region 1 and 3 are definitely involved. This was the aim of the question. Thank you. So we have 5 minutes to go. So I suggest that we show the results of the poll, and we have you some commenting, and then we wrap up. So as we can see here, we are seeing the comparison between the replies that we had in previous similar events in the MENA conference and in the European one, and then the last to the right is today's conference. So we can see that the one that got the highest score is a 3.3 to 3.8 gigahertz IMT identification, followed by the 6 gigahertz band for IMT as well. So in this region, obviously, the IMT issues are going to be at the top of the agenda, according to this poll, which is not necessarily the results in the other 2 regions, which was the UHF band, the one that got the highest score, and this is explained by the fact that the other 2 were conducted in region 1 countries, and this is region 3. So let me go back to you and have you and give you a couple of minutes to wrap up, to say your final thoughts, including comments on the results of this poll if you so wish. So let's go by the order that we had at the beginning. So Luciana, you go first.
Thank you, Mario. Well, for me, it particularly not surprising. We see the UHF as WRC-23 Region 1 catching up with the rest of the world. We had that discussion in WRC-15 for Regions 1 and 3. So Regions 2 and 3. So now it's a big issue for Region 1. It should not be a big issue for Regions 2 and 3. Really happy to see 3338 and 6 gigahertz in high priority. It is certainly high priority for us because we see the mobile industry growing. I just heard a few comments that I would like to mention, that we do understand the C-band is very much used in APAC. I come from Latin America. It's also very much used in Latin America. But there has been a change in attitude towards the C-band, in looking for other technologies or for bands, or looking to use the band more efficiently. So countries are asking themselves, do we need 800 megahertz for satellite spectrum, or can we do with less than 800 megahertz? And many countries are coming back with less than 800 megahertz. So I think those are my final words, to say that there is a way out there. Lots of countries are doing that, and the discussions are very welcome in this cycle. But again, thank you very much, Mario, and thank you, Forum Global.
Thank you, Luciana. Zhu, your final thoughts?
Yeah, first, thank you for this chance. Secondly, I think for the spectrum, global harmonized is very key for the IMT. If a different country, different region have different choice, I think no one can afford the high cost for the mobile network. So how to working together, unify to the same direction in the next cycle is very key. So let's working together. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thanks very much. Ter, your final thoughts from the satellite community?
Thank you again, Mario. And going by the results of the poll, it's clear that the C-band spectrum aspects are at the top of the list. And in this respect, we should reiterate again that the 3 gigahertz range, the 4 gigahertz range, as well as the 6 through 7 gigahertz uplink band, all continue to be critical towards supporting the customers of satellite operators, as well as the activities of governments and administrations to provide connectivity to their citizens. We would imagine that at present, in as much as there is a deployment and a rollout of 5G networks, we should also highlight that it's important to evaluate the fact that not all available spectrum is actually being used. We know, for instance, that some of the operators in the terrestrial mobile space do not necessarily use all the spectrum that's been made available. And we know this is applicable in a fair number of jurisdictions that have already moved early in rolling out networks. And so as a consequence, and you did make reference to this at the start of the presentation, Mario, about the existence of an ecosystem. There is spectrum that is being used. There is expansion spectrum for existing and incumbent services. And we do believe that especially in the C-band spectrum, that this should be preserved and maintained, and other spectrum be evaluated for the IMT services that are anticipated in the future.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Walid, your final thoughts, please.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I'm not surprised with the result of the poll. The C-band comes first, and we as broadcasters, as I mentioned, we are concerned. So and we are involved. We will be involved in this subject. I'm a bit surprised with the fixed IMT studies that only got 6%. I know that satellite, direct to home satellite reception in Region 3 is quite cool, and I would have expected a bit more, but that's how it is. And for the UHF band, yes, for WRC-23, it's not explicitly for region 3, but as I said, it would be useful to follow, I think, what's happening in region 1. Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity given to us. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Walid, and thank you all. It's been a very interesting discussion, and this is just the beginning of the discussion as we are at the start of the cycle. As I mentioned yesterday, this is a very diverse region, the Asia Pacific. So we have very highly developed economies and industrialized countries that will, of course, deploy 5G immediately if they have not yet done so, and they will go up to the maximum possible in the high-notch technological developments. And we have other countries that, because of their geography and their socio-economical development, are, of course, in need of other services, as we were mentioning. And this includes the small islands in the Pacific, but also include mountainous countries like Nepal or like others like that. And they are looking for other solutions, and they're using other services until these new technologies can come to their service. So such a diverse set of needs and realities puts the discussion to a, let's say, higher level. And this is the challenge we have all in trying to harmonize globally our decisions. So having said that, I thank you again for an excellent panel discussion. And we'll move forward immediately with the next part of the session, which is the views of regional groups from outside the region. So it's not the industry views anymore, it's the member states' views, but from outside the region. So we have 3 regions represented: the ASMG regional group that represent the Arab region, the CEPT, which is the European region, and the RCC, which is the CIS region. So I have the pleasure to invite Tariq Alawadi, who is the chairman of the ASMG, Chris Woolford, who is the chairman of the ECC, CEPT, and Sergei Pashtuk, who is the vice chairman of the RCC working group for the preparation of the array and WRC. Welcome. How are you?
Thank you very much.
Good morning. Yeah, thank you.
It's very good to see you, and thank you for joining us. And thank you for waiting, because we've had a bit of a delay and you've been backstage there, but it's very nice to have you. So let me start by Tariq. Tariq, you are the chairman of the ASMG. The ASMG has already met this year, and you had the good luck of being able to meet physically before COVID-19 stroke. And so your preparations of WRC-23 are already started. So can you share with us your views on the region, and if you want also on the industry panel we just had? Please go ahead.
Well, thank you very much, Mario, and good evening, everybody. There in Asia Pacific, I would like to thank also Spectrum Forum for organizing this seminar and conference, and allow me to be there with you all the time. So thank you very much to all of you. My presentation will be just very quick. I'll go through it about the ASMG preparation for WRC-23. As you clearly mentioned that maybe our the only regional group who has a good chance that time to have physical meeting before this COVID-19 come up with this height. And we met here in February in Abu Dhabi, UAE. At this meeting, if we go to the second slide, I'll just give you a brief about ASMG. ASMG being established in 2001 by the ICT Arab Council under the Arab League. And the aim of that one to coordinate and work together for the issues related to spectrum management and for preparation for ITU, international or regional meetings, conference, seminar related to spectrum. And of course, we are participating to the ITU working group, study groups, and submitting all contribution there. In the last meeting, the ASMG has re-elected me again to continue chairing the ASMG for this coming cycle. And I'll be happy to work with you all for the preparation of WRC-23. The next slide. This is just a main outcome of WRC-19, which is interesting to everyone. And for the Arab group, the main thing that, of course, for all the world is interesting to it is the additional spectrum for INT being allocated in WRC-19, especially in the millimeter wave. And those bands really led the countries to start working and develop develop the national spectrum plan and updated it. Like, for example, UAE and some other countries, already now we have updated our national spectrum plan to include those millimeter wave. And very soon you will hear that UAE also will assign 26 gigahertz to our operators. And also in the UAE, we have already developed a 5G strategy and beyond, which shows how the UAE plan for implementing the 5G from now for 5 years, and what is the milestone, everything we have put it. It's already been announced, and it is already available on the TRA website, or will be put it now with the updated version. The other issues, of course, with the eSIM, this is also was one of the important things, and Arab Group has interest in this one here. The regulatory procedure for non-geostationary satellite and the RSTT for the railway radio communication system between train and tracks. And it is important for us because some countries like UAE and Saudi Arabia, especially in GCC, already started with the big main project, which we call it Union Train, which will have move through those different countries in GCC, and it will be good for them to use the spectrum that has been assigned for this one. And the next slide, this is just to show you in UAE, for example, what they have done in order to update the national spectrum plan, the UAE spectrum outlook. This is another document that we have worked on it last year, and we were waiting for WRC-19 to finish in order to finalize the UAE spectrum outlook. And it has been updated, approved by the board of directors of the TRA. And this document, it shows what will be the plan for using all the spectrum for different radio services from now till 2025. It is a very important document for us. It's very high level. And in this document, you can see each band, what we will be used and how we can use it in different radio services. And if it is required to be vacated from different services, what we have to do it. And the next slide, this is just to give you a brief about the meeting that we had last February, physical meeting. And it attended by around 96 people from 14 organizations, 10 administration plus 14 organizations. And we had pleasure also to receive Mr. Mario, the BR director, at this meeting. We had 13 contribution proposals, and we put later on a preliminary review for each agenda item for WRC-23. Of course, followed by that one, we had 2 days Spectrum Conference, which organized by Europe Forum. And the next slide, this is just the ASM structure. Next slide, please. At this line here, you can see we have restructured our ASMG. At this one here, we have developed 5 working groups. This working group they have different agenda item, and each working group, they will have to study those agenda item carefully, prepare contribution to working parties, participate in the working parties of ITUR, and submit contribution there, put a draft a preliminary review in order later on to raise it up to the ASMG meeting. Now, in the next slide, you can see each working group, which agenda item has been assigned. For example, working group 1, which is issues related to the fixed mobile, they have these agenda items. You can see it here. Second slide. The working group 2, they have issues related to the aeronautical and maritime services. So second, next slide. This is the third group, which related to the science services. Working group 4 on the next slide. This is related to satellite services. In all those agenda, in all those working group and agenda item, we put our preliminary review. It can be shown in the next slides. But working group 5, this one here, since this will require to be prepared just prior to the conference, we have just created this group right now, but the work really, as you're aware, it will be started just prior to the conference. Now, in the next slides, all the slides from here till the end, it just give you a brief or preliminary view for ASMG on each agenda item. But maybe the most important, you can see it here, 1.1, which related to the 4 gigahertz. We have just asked to study this band and to consider the current uses, and then later, the next meeting, we'll have our position. 1.2, which is related to different frequency bands for IMT again, and that is also inviting ASMG administration to prioritize the frequency bands in region 1, and that can be supported with consideration of the outcome of the studies that need to be conducted with view to set appropriate conditions to protect these services. For the 1.3, as you're aware, this is already as Arab proposal from ASMG to WRC-19 to elevate the status of the frequency band 3.6, 3.8 to primary. Now, I don't want to go to all agenda items because it will take time, but we had our second virtual meeting 2 weeks ago. And in that meeting, we have encouraged all Arab group to start their preparation for WRC-19 and 23 by participating in the working parties. We know that the working parties already been started, and it is good that most of the countries attending the meetings. This is good, but still there are some challenges in order to participate well at this meeting, and the Arab group will try the best to submit their proposals at this working parties, and hopefully that I don't think by this year we will be able to have physical meeting working parties. By next year to have some physical meeting working parties. However, we will encourage now to have this virtual meeting, and in the next ASMG meeting virtual, I would like to invite you all to participate in the virtual meeting and to share with you the latest or updated position for each agenda item. So thank you very much for having me again and give me this time for participating in your meeting. Wish you all the best.
Thanks very much, Tariq. So thank you for sharing the advance of the Arab group in this regard. Thank you also for sharing this outlook that the UAE, spectrum outlook that the UAE has adopted. I think that having a long-term spectrum plan by a national government is very important for all stakeholders in order to plan for future investments and development. This is a very good thing, and many other countries should do the same, in my view. So let's move on. And Chris, you are next. Can you please share with us the views of the CEPT?
Thank you, Mario. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak today. And I'm going to speak about what we're doing in Europe through the CEPT. so if we go to the next slide, like others, CPT is very happy with the outcome of WRC-19. We think excellent work was done, and lots of progress was made on some really important issues. I've just flagged some of the high-profile issues there. I mean, mobile tends to grab the headlines. I think it is just worth emphasising what a good agreement I think was reached in relation to the 26 gigahertz band in particular. I mean, that was a really, really difficult issue. And I think to come out of WRC-19 with an agreement in relation to that band was actually quite a significant achievement. Also, some really important work around Wi-Fi, around satellite issues. And others have already also spoken on the resolution on gender equality. I think, again, a really important initiative that the ITU and the WRC process has started there. I mean, issues around diversity and inclusion are becoming more and more important, and it's really essential that we address those in the context of the ITU and through the WRC process. And I do see that as an important step forward, and the CPT looks forward to continue to engage with WRC colleagues in relation to gender equality issues. In terms of how the European process was managed, I mean, as usual, this was done through CPT, which has always led for Europe at the WRC at WRCs. We have, however, seen increased interest from the European Commission in relation to WRC matters, primarily as they become more and more important. So we saw close cooperation between CPT and the European Commission at WRC-19. And I would expect that to continue. And then finally, I do have to say, I know others have said it before, I mean, it was a genuine pleasure to spend 4 weeks in Sharm el-Sheikh. We didn't really know exactly what to expect before we went to Sharm el-Sheikh, but I think I can speak on behalf of CPT to say that it really did exceed expectations in terms of being an absolutely beautiful place and a much better climate than we might have seen in Geneva at that particular time. So that's in terms of just some of the key outcomes from WRC-19. If we go to the next slide, I mean, while I think there were some huge positives and actually huge amounts of good work and excellent outcomes from WRC-19, I just wanted to highlight a couple of things where we might want to think about for future conferences, where things, it might be possible just to improve things a little bit. And one observation I would make is that a lot of issues went down to the final days of the conference. Now, you always know that's going to happen. I mean, probably with something like 26 gigahertz, we could have predicted that that would have been the case. You know that it's unlikely that that's going to be solved early on. It's very contentious. It's probably going to go down to the final days now as the conference. But what we saw with WRC-19 was actually there were lots of issues where that happened, including some where you might have expected progress to be made earlier in the conference. So I think that's something to be aware of because it does lead to potential issues around transparency, particularly if issues are all being solved by regional heads in separate meeting rooms and what have you. So I think that's just something to bear in mind for future conferences. Whether we can try and ensure that some issues can be resolved earlier if possible. And then the second area I'd highlight was just around future agenda items. We've had faced this issue before, but it was quite difficult and challenging discussion again around the future agenda for WRC-23 in this case, with some very last minute discussions, some late inputs, and perhaps a slight sort of lack of coherence sometimes about what that agenda was going to look like. And I'll come back to that in just a moment if we go to the next slide. So in terms of the WRC-23 agenda, I mean, I think there's going to be, as we've already seen from the session earlier, a lot of focus on the mobile issues. I mean, I think coming back to that issue around the cohesiveness of the agenda, I mean, I think with agenda item 1.2, certainly I didn't expect such regional variations as we've ended up with there. And I wonder if that is a particularly helpful way of moving forward. That's something we might want to think about in terms of whether that is the right answer, because I think generally we prefer to see global allocations where possible. but we do here under agenda item 1.2 see quite a lot of regional approaches. And also, I mean, things like 100 megahertz of spectrum in the 7 gigahertz band. I do wonder how useful that might be for mobile if considered in isolation. But that's something we will see under the coming years as through the preparatory process. In terms of Europe, I mean, other high-profile agenda items. 1.5 on UHF. That's undoubtedly likely to be a significant issue for Europe. Anything to do with broadcast and mobile spectrum tends to be quite high profile. We are seeing a huge amount of interest across Europe at the moment in the 6 gigahertz band. There is lots of work that's ongoing in the CPT at the moment, indeed outside of the WRC process, but we are currently consulting on proposals for wireless access systems, RLANs, Wi-Fi in the lower part of the 6 gigahertz band. That's an ongoing consultation. Is increasing interest, and I'd say increasing interest from both the Wi-Fi community and the mobile community in relation to the upper part of the 6 gigahertz band, and that obviously is on the WRC agenda, at least for region 1 under agenda item 1.2. So that's quite a potentially contentious issue. And then agenda item 9.1c, addressing fixed wireless broadband in the fixed service. That's raising quite a lot of interest and some concerns. Partly, I think, because it's such a broad agenda item. I mean, it covers all the fixed service. So there's a lot of spectrum bands that could potentially be covered by that agenda item. So I've just highlighted there some of the main or the issues of most interest at this very early stage. I mean, it is worth emphasizing that this is a very, very early stage, and there's lots of other issues that I haven't mentioned here, but these are some of those that have just grabbed the early attention. In terms of how CPT will address this, if we go to the next slide, I mean, this is the structure that we've agreed for WRC-23. The CPT met in June. It was a virtual meeting to agree this structure, and it's similar to what you've seen previously from CPT and indeed from what other regions are doing. We have 5 groups. The first one looking at science and regulatory, PTB looking at space, PTC looking at the aeronautical and maritime. We then have a separate project team for UHF, which is sort of the broadcast issues, and that's got just the one item in it. And then we have the mobile issues being dealt with in PT1, and PT1 also doing some mobile issues in CPT, which are outside the WRC process. The whole CPG process, preparatory group process, will be led by Alexander Collard from Switzerland. We've identified chairs for the individual project teams. We've also identified coordinators for many of the individual items, and that work is really now beginning to get going within CPT. So that's sort of perhaps where I'll stop here. I mean, I hope that gives a bit of a flavour of what we're doing and what we see as some of the key issues within CPT. I mean, obviously, as I've said before, it is very early stages. The next meeting of the CPG, which is undertaking this work, chaired by Alexandra, will be at the end of this year. So, as I said, please do watch out and do participate in that meeting if you're interested. And we look forward to working with you and with the regional groups and with the ITU in preparing for WRC-23. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chris, for your good presentation and good comments regarding WRC-19. Particularly, I like the one on how you enjoyed and the European countries enjoyed being in Sharm El-Sheikh for 4 weeks after the difficult times you gave me to accept this. So I'm glad to hear this positive feedback. But on a more serious note, all your comments on how to improve the decision making at the conference are well noted, and we are working on them because we share those concerns, mainly those that people pushing for decisions on important topics till the end, and then if there are many of them, then the results are not of the quality that there should be. So let's go on to our last speaker, of this group, which is Sergey. Welcome, Sergey. You are going to talk to us about the RCC work and views towards WRC-23. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Mario, for first of all giving me the floor, and of course for the organizer to invite RCC for this important seminar and to share with all of you our preparation process to the next conference. So first of all, if you can show the next slide, I stop on the topic of previous conference, WRC-19, and RCC was lucky enough in terms of the physical meeting for the preparation of the next conference and to look into the result of the previous conference, as we have a physical meeting as ISMG has, as Arab group has. So in February, we have a very short meeting where we look into the result of the conference, WRC-19, and start preparation to the WRC-23. So first of all, about the WRC-19 previous conference. For most of the RCC countries, the Egypt and Sharm el-Sheikh is a well-known resort, by the way, and a lot of people come into this place for leisure activity. And for this time, when we have a WRC-19, we also was very, very pleased to have this place for the discussion of very difficult and complex issues at this place, where we can find not only warm atmosphere and warm and very clear sea, but also we have a very nice environment to discuss all this topic. So we all this and on behalf of all RCC country, I would like to say great thanks to organizer, to Egypt, and of course to ITU, that they managed to organize and to agree on the on this meeting outside of Geneva. And to my memory, it's the second time when we have a WRC outside of Geneva. And this conference for RCC country was very successful. We have a lot of topics which was resolved according to what we expect. And in particular, I can mention one issue dealing, of course, with IMT, this millimeters wave, and the result was very great. And after the conference, we have already some decision taken on a national basis for implement the result of the conference. And one of the example is Russian Federation, that we almost, I guess, 2 weeks ago have a first 5G license issued for the use of millimeters wave all around the country. Almost 83 regions now will start 5G activity in millimeters wave. So this is one of the result which already implemented. But saying this, I can also admit that at the first meeting, physical meeting, which was in February, it's already quite a long time from now. And we see that WRC kind of history already, very good history. And we start preparation to the next conference. And I stop on this slide to explain a little bit how we organize the preparation to the next conference for the RCC. And then stop on some key topics that we identified for the next WRC 23 conference, topics which are very important and could be key topics for our region during the discussion in 2023. So first of all, we have in RCC created working group for preparation to the WRC and radio assembly. And this working group is a part of the Radio Frequency and Satellite Orbit RCC Commission. So this commission has also two other working groups, but this particular working groups is for preparatory process to the ITU radio activity, so assembly and radio conference. Actually, we have our chairman, Albert Nalbandian, who was one more time elected to chair this preparatory process and to chair this working group. And personally, me was elected as a vice chair of this working group for this preparatory process. So our organization in this working group is maybe a little bit different from the other regional group. And this is why I explain a little bit. So we have for every agenda item, we have a coordinator and coordinator groups. So we do not create a specifically sub-working group where we divide it to the number of agenda items to every of the sub-working group. But we have for every agenda item, we have a coordinator and his group, which are much more frequently met and discuss the topic. And for the working group, we have the task to develop three documents, actually. So one document is the RCC position to the agenda items. The second document is, of course, a common RCC proposal. This development coming closer to the WRC. And also we have a specific document which is called coordinator paper. And this paper is developed by every of coordinators group. In this paper, we combine all the history about the agenda item, combine all the activities in other regional group and international organization, their views on the issue. Also, we include into this document activity in ITU, particular working parties who are involved in the agenda item. And of course, we reflect position and situation in RCC countries. So based on this element in the coordinators paper, you also find the proposal from coordinator on the RCC position and the action to be taken. And this particular position later on will be discussed in a working group meeting and agree as a common RCC position to on this particular agenda. So this is our I would say administrative or organization activity in RCC in preparation to the conference. As I mentioned, so far we have only one physical meeting. It's only one, but fortunately it was physical. So where we make all these administrative arrangements. And the next meeting will be already virtual, and it will be in the end of August, 26, 28 August, a virtual meeting for the working group. And I also invite all the colleagues, especially, of course, who knows Russian language, because we have this meeting in Russian language, to participate and to see how it's progress in RCC on the agenda items in preparation to the conference. Next slide, please. So now I will stop on the key topic that after the first meeting and after the some virtual meeting of our coordinator, we can indicate are important for the RCC. First of all, there is a block of agenda items dealing with IMT spectrum. And to this extent, I would like to first of all say about agenda item 1.1. It's IMT in 4.9 gigahertz. Some other region may consider them as aeronautical mobile service in 9 and 4.9 gigahertz. But for RCC country, this band is very important, particular for IMT deployment and implementation. And the main reason for this is that C-band in 3, 4, 3, 6 megahertz in some country are difficult to be implemented in short term. There need to have some time for phasing out other system in order to clear the band for IMT. For some RCC countries, there is an issue that there is not much spectrum in this 3.4, 3.6 due to the number of IMT operators who wish to start 5G in this band. And you see that we have a number of countries who has 4 and even more operators, and 200 megahertz is not enough. So they are also looking at this additional frequency band in 4.9. And also there is countries for those which is really difficult to deploy even in the long term. The frequency bands 3, 4, 3, 6 and 4.9 gigahertz is, I would say, starting and the key frequency band in C-band for 5G deployment. So this issue we consider in RCC as an issue which give additional spectrum for IMT for 5G deployment. And the topic which are put on agenda of WRC-23 is important to get rid of some restriction, some condition for IMT, while of course keeping our colleague who are using aeronautical mobile service be happy and be able to work and to operate their aeronautical mobile service as well. So we look at this topic trying to find the best solution for it. Then, of course,
sorry to
yes.
interrupt you.
Yes,
Can
yes,
you
please
wrap up because your time's up? Thank you.
Yeah, I will be wrap up in 2 minutes. Yeah, thank you.
Okay,
so
great. Thank you.
The next block of topics is if you can show on the screen. Next slide, please. This is the topic of UHF band. This is something which is the most important for RCC country. We consider that at this conference we will be in a position to see what the future of UHF band, of broadcasting and mobile service in UHF band should be. And for RCC countries, this is one of the key elements. Next slide, please. Then there is a number of satellite and science agenda items for the next conference. And for RCC country, we look into agenda item 113. This agenda will be linked to the some scientific project for space activity, and we need more, I would say, bandwidth in order to have all the information on a scientific project to be transferred from space to the Earth, and this part of the band is important one. Of course, all the satellite GSO and NGSO eSIMs, as usual, this is something which is especially important for RCC country, taking into account their large territory and sparsely populated area. Next slide, please. And of course, as usual, the key element we would like to discuss and very interested in is the topics on regulatory activity. And here we have agenda item 7. And of course, this fixed wireless broadband access in or IMT technology, convergence of them. So we have this discussion in the past, and we look at this as a regulatory element which need to be clarified how to deal with this issue, and we expect from the conference some suggestion for the future how to deal with that. So I, of course, could not talk about all the topics and all the agenda which are also have interest from one or another country, but I just would like to say that we are working in preparatory to the next conference and would like to work with all regional colleagues and with ITU in order to have a successful solution and method for the conference to be presented and bring the conference the success. Thank you very much for this.
Thanks very much, Sergey. I know you have lots more to say, but sorry, we had limited time. And thank you for your work. You know, the RCC is a very well-organized and cohesive region. So you always bring good inputs to the conference and to the ITUR activities. So I would like to thank all three speakers from the regional groups outside the region for their views. And then to wrap up the session, I would like to invite back KJ, who is from the host regional group, from the APT, for a couple of minutes to wrap up with final thoughts. KJ, would you like to go first?
Thank you, Mario. I will be very brief. Then, number one, I appreciate the Global Forum to organizing this one for these regions. Number two, I also appreciate Mario. Even you are very busy, but you moderate these sessions. Number three, I also appreciate those regional representatives. I know they are very busy people, but they share the time with us and also share their preparations. Number four, I have kind questions to Mario that would you more facilitate the regional groups discussions. I know there, probably you are planning to have kind of the informal or regional group in this year. But what I'm saying is informal, which means that after September, APT will be able to provide our structure in detail, including each agenda item coordinators' names and email address. So I believe the other regional group already prepared that. So I ask kindly Mario to coordinate among the regional groups to share those detailed informations by email or etc. And then also try to organize the regional groups representatives and our half-day discussions, whatever they are thinking, and how we share those informations and briefly. Lastly, I see that some points from the Chris that during the WRC-23 we need to think how to improve to develop the future agenda items. Even though we started such things in the very first week of the conference, but it takes 4 weeks, and the very final stages it will be finalized. But Mario, would you think that how we improve such a situation in future? So with that, I'd like to wrap up, and I will see you again in the virtual room very soon after my meeting in September. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, KJ, and thank you for joining us for this session. I agree with you that early discussion and informal discussion is very important, and we are going to, of course, have it, and I will be happy to facilitate that. And as you mentioned, I was already thinking about it and starting earlier than usual in this cycle because of the increasing challenges that we have in WRCs on the number of topics and the let's say discussions around those topics. I think that these informal discussions might include what Chris mentioned about improving the way in which we discuss issues during WRCs in order to avoid pushing everything to the end, and then we can agree on some gentleman's agreement, let's say, in order to, I don't know if gentleman's agreement is a very gender neutral way of saying it, so I apologize, in order to do it, because it depends on the membership, on the member states. The ITU cannot enforce a decision making that the members don't want to follow by it. So we can get to an agreement about everybody's role in order to avoid having all these topics pushed to the end of the conference. So I will be more than happy to facilitate that, and we will start working on that sooner rather than later. So just to wrap up the session, I think it was a most interesting session. We have seen the views of the industry and the views of the governments regarding the various issues. It's always a very interesting and endless discussion about the priorities for the use of bands. And the idea is to try to accommodate everybody. We need innovation, we need new services in order to progress the industry, the socioeconomic development of countries. We also need incumbent services to continue to operate and the investments to be assured for the future. And we also need some other solutions that are not at the top of the technology, but that are needed for countries to bridge the digital divide in areas that are not sufficiently, let's say, addressed by these top-notch technologies. So this is why this is so interesting, this is so passionating, and we will continue engaged in this discussion. So I thank very much Global Forum for having organized it. It's been a pleasure moderating these sessions, and I hope to see you all soon in other virtual meetings and preparatory meetings for that. Thanks very much.
Mario, thank you very much, and yeah, really appreciate your time and all of your thoughts and comments in moderating the sessions. And I think we've had some really interesting discussions this morning, both with the keynotes, with the panel discussion, and then obviously hearing separately from Sergey, Tarek, and Chris from other regions as well. So Mario, thank you very much, and thank you to everyone who has participated in this session. And I hope that everyone has found that discussion useful. I certainly have. We are running a little bit late, but we have delayed the start of the next session by 15 minutes. So we do have 20 minutes or so to go now until the start of the next session. So we wanted to kind of do this, so we do still allow you all to have time for a quick speed networking session, and then also to have a short break as well. So can I suggest that we maybe take 10 minutes or so for the networking? So anyone who wants to join us for the speed networking session, that will be open for the next 10 minutes. You need to navigate to the networking icon on the left-hand menu bar. And then you can bring your audio video feed live, be matched with other attendees, and have the chance to then exchange contact details. So we'll have 10 minutes or so for that, which then gives you a very short, unfortunately, and I do apologize for that, 10-minute break before we're starting again back here on the main stage for the next session, which will be at 4:00 p.m. Indonesia time, for the session that's looking at the millimeter wave ecosystem. So 10 minutes for networking, and then 10 minutes for a quick break, and then we'll be back here for the next session. One other thing I just wanted to mention, I understand that there are a few people who are having some connectivity issues, so we do apologize for that, and we are looking into that. So if you have had any connectivity issues during that session, then we are sorry, we'll look into that. And I want to remind everyone as well that all of the recordings from the sessions are available to watch back if there were any bits that you weren't able to follow. So that said, thank you all very much again for your participation. Thank you to all of our speakers and panelists. As I said, make your way over to the networking that is open now, and we'll see you back here in around about 20 minutes. Thank you very much, and see you shortly.